I wish.
Good morning, everybody. I ask you to put your cell phones down. If you haven't got the Wordle word of the day by now, you're not going to get it. For the record, I got it in 3 this morning. But I did look at my wife's. Folks, in the early hours of this morning, those of you who follow the news, you will be aware that we saw the start of a full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and with it, the threat of war. A little earlier this week, the delivery of the 2022 South African budget with this statement by the finance minister, and I will read it to you. A key weakness in economic performance has been persistently high joblessness, which lies at the root of poverty and exacerbates inequality. The pandemic has elevated the public debate, he says, on how government should provide societal protection to poor and vulnerable households. A day earlier, there was a United States landmark report that was delivered by the United Nations. It concluded that the risk of devastating wildfires around the world will surge in coming decades as climate change further intensifies what the report describes as a global wildfire crisis. Major risk indicators in 72 hours. It's a nice way to start the morning, isn't it? Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to the launch of this year's Institute of Risk Management Risk Report. As we say in the news communique, which will be issued a little later, it is a vital blueprint, guideline, primer for risk managers across the country. It gives a landscape, it gives a scope, it gives a foretaste of what is expected in the next 12 months. It is an important document. It's a document that we will unveil today. It's a document that we will talk about in a conversation a little bit later on. My name is Jeremy Maggs, and I'm facilitating proceedings today. We're live in Johannesburg. So nice to be in front of a live audience again, and also online, I understand, to over 600 delegates. A special welcome to our guests from global associations, the Institute of Risk Management in the United Kingdom, also Parima, Belram, and the GVNW. To all of you, a very warm welcome as well. There's a lot to go through today. Without any further ado, I want to ask IRMSA's President, Tabili Nyaba, to come to the podium to give us a few opening remarks. Good to see you. When I asked you this morning how you were feeling, please turn around and tell everyone how you felt, because it's a great counterpoint to the gloom and doom which I have just articulated. How are you feeling today?
Jeremy, I'm super justly and super magondoviously fantabulous.
There we go, ladies and gentlemen.
Great rising to each and every one of you. Rise and shine, top of the afternoon, and indeed good evening. I'm saying this, don't think that I'm wondering, it's not at night. It is because people actually logging in both locally and internationally. Jeremy has already alluded to it. We've got people from UK, people from US, so we just want to acknowledge them. And it is such an honor to have each and every one of you here, guys. And I just need to say, hi, you know, the virtual world does not do justice. I was seeing people like, in person, like, but you're more finer in life, than you are, on the virtual world. People are looking quite young, and I think that's exactly how they are. But I mean, in the virtual world, you're like, okay, let me just composure, because you know what, this is a senior that I'm speaking to, when it's not actually the case. With that said, we would actually like to thank you once more, guys, for being here with us. We just want to acknowledge the guys that are online as well. We know your vibe, guys. We can feel it. We know that you are there. We just want to thank you for joining as well. So I will do a little bit of reflection on 2021, and then just a mid-perspective of where we are going or how things are looking like for 2022. So 2021, in my view, it will definitely go down as one of the years that had significant level of complexity, volatility, uncertainty, because I believe we have been operating in what we call the perfect storm. I'm saying this is a perfect storm because it's a perfect storm of social issues. It's a perfect storm of macroeconomic issues. Jeremy has just given us a perspective of what has just transpired in the last 72 hours. The environmental threats that we seem to be operating under, the digital transformation, the political and regulatory developments. So in my view, we certainly have been operating in the perfect storm. So what does 2022 have in store for us? I think there is no doubt that we're still going to be seeing and some of the familiar challenges that have been experiencing, like the low economic growth. I mean, we've picked that up from the budget speech, the escalating oil prices, the fuel prices, electricity costs. I believe that the inflation rate, actually not even I believe, it has been already said, inflation rates are going to go up. The ever-persistent issue of load shedding bordering on the grid failure, the widening inequality, including the digital divide, which I believe we are not really talking a lot about. And indeed, the country's triple case of PUI, which is poverty, unemployment, and inequality. That's one side of it. On the other side, we also it's also having the issues of call it the social discontent. We're probably going to be seeing yet again the outbreak of the social unrest, and that is not only going to talk to our economy, but it also raises the risks of immigration and also the flight risk of the key resources. Then our SOEs, they still continued the uncertainty around the state of our SOEs. Environmentally, I've already spoken about it. We're seeing the climate, there might be the climate action failure, the extreme weather issues that we've just spoken about. Here in South Africa, we've seen the La Nina. And I must say, guys, I've not enjoyed a proper summer day, since I don't know when. So I'm sure that is the case with. So we think this change is actually happening as well. But with this being said, we have been navigating through this perfect storm. It's no doubt we have been. But then that raises questions. I've got questions around that. Is it really because we are truly a resilient population that fights hard, able to pick it up? Or we're just being immune to the crisis that surrounds us every single day? Or we're having what you call the slow death scenario? Or we're just simply ignoring what is happening around us? So those are some of the questions that I have in mind. And the reason why I'm saying this or even asking this is because the risks that we're highlighting on the risk report that we're launching today, they're not new. We've raised them before. Although I need to say that, yes, some of them, they might have evolved. Maybe the risk drivers might have changed, maybe the levels might have increased, and some might actually have materialized. But they're not really something that is new. So that is why then in this risk report that we're launching today, we're really calling on all the individuals and all the organizations, regardless of whether in the public sector, private sector, consulting, to come together and actually collaborate in addressing this compounding and influential risks that are clear, guys, that they're interconnected, they're interrelated, and they're interdependent. We're saying it's no longer about identifying them, but it's actually about decisively and speedily implementing the risk mitigation strategies in an integrated manner. We need to leverage the progress that we've made. It's of no doubt we have made significant progress, but we need to translate those progress and our efforts into tangible outcomes. South Africa, without any doubt, has to respond with risk intelligence and risk resilience in order to avoid, these imminent consequences that we might face in case some of the risks that we're actually highlighting come to the fore, they actually materialize or they even increase. And you know what? Maybe I'm an optimist. I believe there is hope. I truly believe there is hope. With that being said, there are so many countries that have been able to turn around. Guys, the likes of the Singapores, Saudi Arabias, you name them, they have been able to turn around. I believe that we can certainly do that as well if we work together towards one future. There is hope if we understand our current reality, if we understand the scenarios that might actually play out, and we try hard to influence those scenarios to be what we want them to be. I actually believe that the next scenario that is actually going to materialize will depend on our urgent and decisive action. I also believe that it's not only about threats, but it's also about opportunities. So I believe this is also an extraordinary time for extraordinary opportunities for us. But we can only seize these opportunities if we've got the right mindset and we've got the right attitude. Problem solvers. They thrive in chaotic and uncertain times. You know why? It's because they act to change their future. Winners realize that in a world of growing uncertainty, they need to resort to action. That is why then this risk report is about call to action. Call to action for ethical leadership, visionary leadership, courageous leadership by all leaders from all levels, from the government, from corporates, from unions, from civil society. But this call for action also requires an enabling and applied risk management approach that integrates risk, strategy, and business resilience. I've got no doubt. Recently, I'm super excited about this proactive and actually predictive risk management, because I think that is a huge driver, and that should be the biggest focus of the risk practitioners, to kind of like see the storm coming and influence the decisions that are being made by the organizations. I just want to end this with this quote. In these troubled, uncertain times, we don't need more command and control. No, we don't need that. We just need better means to engage everyone's intelligence in solving challenges and crises as they arise. That is what Margaret Whitley said. So we are launching this risk report today. We certainly would not have done it without our sponsors who have partnered with us, to host this launch. So I just want to acknowledge them and thank our sponsors for ongoing support. So the first one that I want to thank is the AIG. They are actually our main sponsor for this webinar. And AIG has partnered with us as IRMSA for the last few years to host the risk report event. Thank you so much, AIG. Much appreciated. I would also like to thank our brand sponsor for the webinar, which is Curious Software. Thank you so much for partnering with us as well. We really and truly appreciate you as well. And I nearly started to dance. Sorry, guys, you must tell me when you're going to do these things, Thank you once more. And then our risk report ebook that has been digitally empowered by Cura as well. Guys, you gotta see this, all right? You've got to see this risk report. It's off the hook. And I'm a mother of what are they, Gen Zs. So they try to teach me all this lingo that is being said. So it's dope and it's off the hook. So you must check it out. It's very nice. All right, as I carry on with sponsors, I would also, sorry, not all sponsors, my thanks. I would also like to thank the risk report advisors. Thank you all. Thank you to all of you guys to our advertisers basically. For coming through and also assisting us. We've got all our sponsors over there, so we really and truly appreciate all of you. Oh, I see there's Old Mutual there as well, I'm just saying, guys, but I'm just seeing the Old Mutual there as well and the rest of the sponsors. So thank you so much. I would also love to thank the Risk Intelligence Committee. They are the guys that have pulled this brilliant piece of work together, and the Risk Report Working Group for your hard work, guys, and for the dedication in putting this report together. We really, really and truly appreciate you. We've got all these beautiful and brainy people on the screen that have assisted us to pull this beautiful piece of work. Thanks to each and every one of you. Lastly, but definitely not least, I just want to thank the IRMSA team. You never to us. how you feel about guys, but personally, and having been with IRMSA for a very long time, they just keep on doing the greatest of things. Under the leadership of Pat, we really salute you and thank you. And for the rest of the IRMSA team, we really thank you guys. And lastly, from my side, guys, yes, we're talking risk. It could be depressing, but remember that we're not only looking at the threats, but the opportunities. So please enjoy the session with a smile, with positive thoughts, and a grateful heart, because there is certainly the hope. Thank you.
Tabili, thank you so much for those uplifting and encouraging words to start our session. I've just texted Mrs. Maggs. She asked me how the meeting was going, and I said it was off the hook. I just got a question mark back from her. She has no idea what I'm talking about. Thanks for the reference as far as climate change is concerned. Couldn't agree with you more. 65% chance of thunder showers later today. I thought I should just mention that to you. Ladies and gentlemen, every once in a while you meet someone or you engage with them and you are truly disappointed when that interaction comes to an end because you would like the conversation to continue. Then what annoyingly happens is that you will find yourself repeating what that person said at some other function or dinner party or around the braai fire, whatever it is, a couple of days later. Very annoying, but it's also very edifying as well. I haven't met too many of those people in my life, but one of them is sitting in the room today. And I hope that you take away the energy and the wisdom and the insight from this person that I have taken away on the occasions that I have interacted and met with the person and also had the privilege to interview him as well. I want to introduce you to Dr. Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh. He is a lecturer in the Department of International Relations at Wits University here in Johannesburg. He's also a research fellow at the Wits Institute for Social and Economic Research. He has a very, very long curriculum vitae, and I'm not going to read the whole thing out, but I do want to mention his second book, which, if I'm not mistaken, was out late last year. It's called The New Apartheid, and it was listed as one of the best-selling books of 2021. Read it, because the interlock between the book and the risk report is quite startling. It is important. So, Sizwe, always a great pleasure to talk to you. I'll let you finish that conversation very quickly, and then I will call you up to the stage. Up you come. Ladies and gentlemen, our keynote speaker, and my younger daughter who has just finished at Wits University, I said that I was introducing you today, and the words that she sent back to me is, "Damn, I wish I could be there."
Thank you very much, Jeremy. I return you many thanks for a very generous introduction. And I hope that after this talk today, I'll be able to edify your braai conversations further. So do send me a report back. It's wonderful to be here with you today. Thank you so much for the kind invitation. And to Mam Tabile Nyaba and Pat Simenya and to IRMSA and all of your stakeholders, it's a great privilege and honor to be with you here today. Orthodoxy is the die-hard of human thought. It forgets not, nor can it learn. The words of British author and philosopher Aldous Huxley. Now, there's a lot going on in that quotation, and in my brief discussion today, I'd like to unpack it in the context of the 2022 risk report, the risks that we face as a country together, as risk practitioners that you face, but that we all face as citizens. Orthodoxy, let's start there. What is orthodoxy? Well, technically, it's following a set of beliefs. But we can go further than that. The deeper meaning and the most simple meaning is basically conventional wisdom. What everybody believes. Going along with the crowd. Following the accepted belief system. Orthodoxy. Orthodoxy is the die-hard of human thought. Okay, die-hard. I know there's a movie called that. What are we talking about there? It's really difficult to get rid of orthodoxy. In all the worlds and realms of human thought, the hardest thing to rid ourselves of is conventional wisdom. The wisdom that we receive and we respect, and we take for granted. It forgets not, nor does it learn. You can't quite remember where you got the orthodoxy from, nor can the person who gave it to you. It seems to be perennial, lasts across time, and it doesn't seem to forget itself. But it also can't learn. It stays the same. It stays static. It's unchanging. Orthodoxy is the die-hard of human thought. It forgets not, nor can it learn. Aldous Huxley was an interesting person, wrote many books and essays, both literary and philosophical, fiction and non-fiction, a fascinating mind, and perhaps his two most interesting works are Brave New World and Island. In Brave New World, he sets out to describe a futuristic dystopia. In other words, he looks 500 years into our current future and thinks, what could go wrong? And describes that in wonderful literary detail. His other noteworthy work, Island, does the exact opposite. That asks, what could go right? And he paints a picture of utopia. So I guess in other words, you could call him a risk manager, a scenario planner. Someone who tries to look deep into the future, think deeper than other people think about the future, and imagine what kind of scenarios we might arrive at if we engage in that process of deep thought. And that process of deep thought requires contesting orthodoxy. It requires going against received wisdom and really thinking beyond the crowd at a particular moment in time. And that's really the theme of what I'd like to discuss with you today. So in the brief time that I have, and I promise, unlike any normal university lecturer, I won't detain you for too long. I'd like to touch on three themes and areas around this question of the risk of failing to contest orthodoxy, or the risk of falling victim to orthodox beliefs. Firstly, I'd like to speak about some of the problems of how we diagnose our country's multiple and myriad crises. Some of the orthodoxies that go into the way we diagnose those crises. Secondly, I'd like to speak about the danger that comes with diagnosing those problems in that way. And then finally, you'll be glad to hear I'll speak about the optimism and the opportunities that arise when we do challenge ourselves to think anew and to refresh and revisit how we look at our country. So to begin, many of the diagnoses that we see, and I might add that the IRMSA risk report is a refreshing departure from this, and I'll touch on that more, follow a similar set of assumptions. So we look at various scenarios. There's usually a bad scenario that we really don't want to be at. There's a middle scenario, which is muddling through, and there's an optimistic scenario, which is, and I might add that the more time goes on, the less optimistic the optimistic scenarios become, which is a rosy future. one of the benefits of the 2022 report, which I've had the benefit of looking at, is not only that it creates its own scenarios, but it actually puts other people's and institutions' scenarios against the IRMSA scenarios. So we can actually see all the different scenarios in one place. We can see their similarities and their differences. And this is important. It certainly makes us look beyond our noses and gets us to think deeper than the headlines at any given moment. What I'm excited about with the IRMSA report is that it is, for the first time, and the theme of the report, like the theme of this talk, is about, okay, you know what? We need to do something different, because we've been talking about this for a long time, and coming up with this report for a long time. Many people have come up with different scenarios. We always fall back on the same way of thinking. The call in this report is to think differently and to do differently. And I might add that we can't do differently before we start thinking differently. So that's what sets this report apart from many of the diagnoses. But one problem with the orthodoxy that we continue to receive, whether this is from policy documents, the speeches of the most powerful people in our country, those who diagnose South Africa's crises, is that we assume that the problem, all effectively in our political landscape at least, boils down to state of policy. That's as far as we're able to think. If we can just get the potholes fixed, and if we can just get the lights on, and if we can just get the water flowing, mind you, I do not dispute what a grand task that seems to be at the moment, nor do I dispute that it would be wonderful if we could get those things working, if we could get services delivered, if we could cut corruption to at least manageable levels. Then we will arrive at a utopia and a nirvana where South Africa becomes the winning nation. We just need to change some policies and change some leadership qualities, and voila, magic, we're back on the road towards that rosy future scenario. But what if that's wrong? What if, even if we fix the potholes, and even if, by some miracle, Eskom wakes up tomorrow and delivers power for 10 years, and even if the deplorable conditions ezilalini and in townships and in informal settlements are ameliorated by excellent local government service delivery, even if some benevolent political figure descends from the clouds and cuts corruption, what if even after all of that, we are still stuck in a situation of structural inequality and injustice that is intolerable? Then we do. And so for me, the thing that we are called to do at the moment, 3 decades into this democratic experiment and project, is to think deeper than simply, of course, the wonderful immediate solutions that present themselves, and into the deeper underlying crises that continue to bedevil our society, that perhaps some of these more superficial problems are obscuring. Now, as Jeremy mentioned, I happen to have written a book on how I happen to diagnose that crisis. I think it has a lot to do with the economic, social, and political wounds that we have not even addressed, let alone healed, from our colonial and apartheid experience. And the democratic government, sadly, has often reinforced rather than combated those trends. But I'm not here to talk about my book today. You might be glad to hear after that brief introduction. I might be wrong. And what I'm really here to say is it's time for those of us in positions of leadership and positions of power to consider orthodoxy and then consider how we go beyond it. Not simply to stay at the surface, but to really think about how we can challenge conventional wisdom. And so I think the biggest risk at least from the perspective of our country, that I identify is not, sure, ESCOM, and it's not even a failing state. Those are crucial risks that could end us all. But the biggest risk we face is not having the bravery to challenge conventional wisdom. And it feels to me that though we think we have a debate in our country, virtually across the spectrum, we fall victim to the same set of assumptions, even though we wear different t-shirts, caps, and other memorabilia. So, having said that, let me explain and explore why I think this is dangerous, and then on the reverse side of that coin, why I think there's great opportunity in the chance we get to rethink this whole thing. We saw in July 2021 shockwaves spreading across our country with an event the like of which I don't think we have seen a parallel, and I am still not sure exactly what to call it. But it happened in July, and there was a lot of unrest, that much I know. What I think that moment told us, we seem to now have suppressed it, as we do as a country, very good at suppressing very serious warnings and continuing with our merry lives. I'm just as guilty as anyone else. What I think we saw there was a great risk and a great danger that I think should occupy all of our minds, especially the minds of risk managers and people across the higher echelons of our economy. And that risk, I think, should be defined a bit more clearly than it has hitherto been defined. The author John Steinberg often quips that South Africa has been on the brink of collapse for at least 100 years. This is true. In many ways, to be South Africa is just to live and feel like we defy political gravity every day. But on the other hand, people often predict that our country is prone to some kind of major revolution. I disagree. Revolutions are swift, simultaneous changes to a country's political, social, and economic fabric very quickly at once. And in all of human history, we have only seen a few. China, Russia, Haiti, France. You struggle to think of others. It's really difficult to change a country's political, social, and economic fabric all at once in a quick go, and live to tell the tale, I might add. And a revolution, whether good, bad, to the left or to the right, has a political content to it. There's an idea which is being pursued to its political, economic, and social conclusion. What we face in South Africa is an unled and anarchistic rebellion, which leaves nothing in its wake, which does not have a political content, which is not about changing parliament to become more representative or remaking economic relations so that we have a more just economy, or changing society so that we no longer adhere to restrictive social mores. No. We would be lucky to get a revolution. A rebellion, unled, anarchistic, and totally random, which goes in whatever direction it happens to go on a particular day and leaves nothing in its wake, and is premised on simply the joy of destruction. That is the risk. And then we would have to pick up the pieces, and from that position of weakness and devastation, we would have to rethink and remake and revisit. So one of the key dangers, no doubt there are many, and one can't list all of the risks and the dangers that we face, but that danger is the one that keeps me up at night. And in July, we saw a flash of what that could look like. It could be sparked by anything. It could be an ANC factional battle. It could be some regrettable outpouring of Afrophobic, xenophobic sentiment. Who knows? But whatever sparks it, the question is, what would actually sustain it and keep it going? And this chaotic rebellion with no political content to it, I think is a preeminent risk, one that we should be fighting to mitigate day and night. So, having depressed you fully and totally, let me come on to some of the opportunities that I believe this moment calls out for. Because just as dangerous as not confronting orthodoxy and not challenging conventional wisdom is, so there is great hope and opportunity and power in thinking about how we could confront this malaise, this crisis, and how we could rethink things that haven't been rethought for at least 3 decades. And why we actually start that intellectual process, that fun, fascinating intellectual process, sitting back and of course saying, yes, these are the policies we think need to be changed, and these are the trade-offs and the tactical decisions we think need to be made. But hold on, let's take another step back. How do we constitute this entire country? How is political power actually constituted, and who says that's perfect? Who says in 1989 to 1994, we came up with the perfect way to think about how South Africa should work for time immemorial? What if we start picking away at some of our assumptions about our economy, what can be done, what can't be done, but also our political constitution, and we actually start to try and rethink those deeper structural features of our society, in addition to just the policy features? Sure, they come with dangers, but that kind of deep thinking always comes with danger. It was dangerous in the late 1980s and early 1990s for people to sit down and say, we're going to create a new constitution. That could have gone in terrible directions. But actually, it went in, by and large, a positive direction. So what prevents us now, our best minds and constitutional theorists and judges and economists and business people and risk managers, from actually coming together to start talking about not just what policy should we change and what margin should we tinker with, but what does it look like to go to an entirely different South African republic? So the period we're living through now might be the First Republic. Every democracy, France is on its 5th republic, Brazil is on its about 89th republic. Every democracy goes through different changes and different modes of changing itself to adapt to the time. Isn't it time to start thinking about the Second Republic? This was a noble experiment. We tried our hardest for 3 decades, but it ultimately failed. And now we need to start thinking about the Second South African Republic. Everything from the Constitution to our deepest held economic orthodoxies need to be on the table in order for us to confront the scale of the challenges with which we're presented. And let me give you some examples of how this kind of new thinking and fresh approach to the problem and deeper approach to the problem can actually enlarge the problem and give us new possibilities and new avenues, so we aren't banging our heads against the same walls year in and year out. So I recently have been fascinated by this debate over South Africa's constitution. To be sure, there have been opportunistic parts of this debate. But I was listening to an interview with Justice L.B. Sachs, pioneer, groundbreaking jurist, former Justice of the Constitutional Court, and someone who's just a towering moral figure. And he was asked in this interview by Songezo Zibi, another of our best journalists, do you like the Constitution? Do you think it's perfect? And sadly, he basically said yes. He said yes. He thinks it's perfect. I've asked so many judges, what would you change about the Constitution? And they say nothing. And I have to say, I get confronted with a bit of orthodoxy when I hear that. But he said, you know what? There was one thing, actually, now that you mention it, that I wish we did. I wish we created a constitutionally protected anti-corruption institution in Chapter 9 or somewhere else in the Constitution that could be insulated via the Constitution from political interference, more than even an independent investigation institution, much less one that's right in the executive. I wish we created that right up front, and that might have insulated us from some of the problems of corruption that we feel now. I thought, wow, that sounds so different to me. No one's talking about that, because if we think that everything's perfect and the structure's fine, it's just the details we need to fill in, then we impoverish our imaginations from the big things we could be doing structurally that could actually open new vistas and new doorways for a different kind of social, political, and economic reality. What if we did that? Why can't we do that? Why can't we do that now? Why can't we say, this is not working institutionally? We need a new constitutionally protected anti-corruption body, and we need to investigate that now. Well, the reason we can't do that, and the reason nobody's talking about that, is because we assume that we have all the answers and we just need to fix the potholes. And this is an example of how thinking differently can change those long-held assumptions. I'll give you another example from the perspective of policy. And again, this could be completely wrong. It's just an example of how we might think differently. So on the one hand, I see in the IRMSA report the idea of labor market deregulation as being important. In other words, making it easy to hire and fire people. And sure, there's a long debate about whether that's good, bad, or indifferent. Then we have another debate in South Africa about social security. Should we extend it? Should we contract it? Should there be a basic income grant? Should there not? Well, if we look at those problems in isolation, and we have these dialogues of the deaf, where people go at loggerheads, then we fail to see how these two policies actually speak to one another. Because there are really economies in the world where, I don't like it, but labor market deregulation has helped drive economic dynamism. But in those economies, there's a very serious social flaw below which you can't fall. So those two policies speak to each other. Yes, it's easier to hire and fire people, but if you get fired, you know you're going to be okay. What we can't do is say we're going to fire everyone. Oh, and by the way, you're consigned to a life of injustice and poverty and degradation. But if we say, well, actually we need to keep a social floor below which no one can fall, then the question of unemployment is not as deep a social and economic problem for the individual, because they know that they're protected by society. Again, two debates going on in silos, but when we take a step back and we challenge orthodoxy, we find new, different configurations and solutions which might lead to a new kind of consensus. Not just saying we need a new consensus and then doing the exact same thing that we've been doing for 3 decades, but actually thinking differently, challenging orthodoxy, which is the diehard of human thought, because it forgets not, neither can it learn. So what I've really implored you to do today is to think differently and to challenge the conventional wisdom. I think that's the hallmark of great entrepreneurship and business. What is a great business other than some institution which looks at the economy and thinks, someone is not thinking this thing. No one has thought this before, but I bet if we do this, it'll work. And it works. Thinking differently to everyone. The paradox is that somehow we all need to realize that it's time to start thinking differently, to start challenging orthodoxies and to go with the consequences of what that means. Maybe that means we need to leave our comfortable homes, whether they be political or economic or social. Maybe that means we need to go into uncharted territory and stare down what future risks and dangers may inevitably arise. One thing's for sure, I can assure you we know where things are going if we keep believing that we have everything sorted out except the policies and the details. And that place is not a pretty one. Orthodoxy is the die-hard of human thought. It learns not, nor can it forget. And if we do one thing, and if we remember one thing in our deliberations, our discussions, and our conversations going forward, it's that our greatest risk is following conventional wisdom. Our greatest risk is embracing orthodoxy. Thank you very much to IRMSA for the opportunity to address you, this august and powerful audience, and I hope that this talk has given you pause and food for thought with a dash of hope. Thank you very much.
Sizwe, thank you so much for that. Did I not warn all of you? You'll be sitting in your garden tomorrow having a cup of tea, and all of a sudden you'll say to yourself, how do I mitigate the risk of chaotic rebellion? It's the last thing you want to do on a Saturday morning, but then it'll be raining, so it's not a problem. Folks, Sizwe, thank you so much. And the book, I'll give it another plug because you really need to read this. It'll channel you in a different direction. It's the new apartheid, and it's well worth reading. Folks, let's get to the report itself now. The real reason why we're here today. So what we're going to do is I'm going to call two experts up. They'll present the report. We'll have a short break, and then we'll get into a panel conversation. What I'm going to do with the panel, and I want to give members a little bit of a heads up. I want to turn this on its head slightly, okay? Oh, here it comes. Here it comes. Folks, what we've done is we will look at all of the risks and we will discuss them. But to the various panel members, I also want you to apply your mind over the next 10 minutes to think about the question that was just posed to us. We need to do something different. We need to go beyond orthodoxy. I want you to apply your minds. I'll give you a little bit of a heads up. We'll know what the risks are, but I also want you to start thinking about how we deal with them and how you challenge them in a different way. You guys thought it was going to be easy. It's not. Okay. So let me call Christelle Marais. Christelle, where are you? There you are. Okay. If I can ask you to come up along with Michael Davies, who will walk you through the report. Christelle is chair of IRMSA's Risk Intelligence Committee and the project leader of the risk report. And Michael Davies contributed to the 2022 risk report as project manager. He's been involved in the resilience and business continuity industry for more than 17 years. Folks, we look forward to what you have to say. Thank you.
The premise of the somewhat sappy but beautifully made 1946 film called Stairway to Heaven was that a British World War II aviator, played by David Niven, had to bail out of his burning Spitfire without a parachute and, despite falling hundreds of feet, somehow survived. The number 2 story in the countdown puts that fiction to shame. The British skydiver was named Michael Holmes. He jumped from 2 miles up. The parachute failed. The backup failed. The only thing to break his fall was a blackberry bush. And yet he not only survived, but 6 weeks later was on the Today Show this morning with Matt Lauer and with the videotape of his own miracle recorded by his own helmet-mounted camera.
Free fall. At 5,000 feet over New Zealand's Lake Taupo, Michael Holmes was plummeting to Earth at 70 miles an hour. He pulled the cord for his main parachute at 4,000 feet, but it didn't fully open, even though it caught enough air to violently spin him around. It was all caught on tape by 2 helmet cameras, his and the helmet camera of fellow skydiver Jonathan King. Seconds later, Michael pulled the cutaway cable to free his main chute, but it was snared in his harness and wouldn't break away. 2,000 feet, he now faced a dire choice: release his reserve chute, which could tangle in the main chute and completely wipe out the little lift he had, or ride it out with the main chute only, hoping it would fully inflate before he hit the ground. He had to make a decision in seconds. After 700 feet, he knew the reserve chute would make little difference. Michael checked his altimeter: 1,100 feet, 800 feet, 650 feet. He decided to release his reserve chute, as he feared it snagged in the main chute and failed to open. Michael was now 15 seconds from impact. He waved goodbye to the camera at 530 feet and believed he would die. Michael crashed into a thicket of blackberry bushes. His buddy, Jonathan King, swooped to his side.
You breathing, man? Yeah. You talk to me, bro? Talk to me, man. How was it? You okay? No.
Not okay, but incredibly, Michael Holmes was alive.
Broken ankle.
Sorry about that, colleagues. I still get goosebumps every time I see it. That's what we told you last year. So we're now about this far from the blackberry bush. And I think, Sabile, you spoke about the perfect storm. That happened last year. And sorry if we are very dramatic about this. You will see also that, and I don't know if you heard it because it's a bit vague in the video, but he got very calm at that point where he said, "I'm dead. Bye." And I'm worried about us because the frantic scrambling for the reserve chute and for the cutout cord and all of that happens before you get very calm and you know you're dying. So I think in this report, we're trying to make the point that we have boiled, we're now the dead frog, okay? And it's going to take so much more work to get us out of that. And I so liked what Cece was saying is, you can now fix the superficial stuff, but we need to fix the people in this country who will take us forward. And if you read the risks that we're looking at now, you see we're making a point there of saying we've watched the risks materialize. So this year's risk wordings and the risk definitions may shock some of us. It's no longer we have a lack of, and therefore we will. It's now, we did have a lack, we didn't fix it. Now we're dealing with the consequences. And often consequences of a risk is something that will happen, and it creates new secondary risks with worse consequences. So that's what you're going to start seeing in this report this year. We are now no longer pulling the punches. We are saying to South Africa, we need to fix things. And to fix the things without fixing the people will not get us anywhere. If we are at a country where we are paying grants to half of the population, how do we enable them also to start fixing and fix the next generation? So, and I think Cece also touched on this, our orthodox way of thinking becomes invisible to us if we get too used to it. If we don't recognize that apart from infrastructure that hasn't been fixed, we need to fix our minds, our collective thinking. Because you can complain so much and you can blame so much, but you can't blame a dead person. And you can't fight with a dead opposition. So we are saying we've run out of time to wait for somebody. And we always say, who will we vote for? Who will be the next leaders? We must uplift skills. You know what? It's us. If we don't start and we don't recognize that people at all levels of South Africa need to lead, then we will not make this happen. So we are saying that at a level in the country where you find yourself, don't wait for the next leader. If you read the risk report and you look at what needs to be done, it needs to be done by many more people than we can count as leaders. And then I think at some 3-4 years risk report, Chris had a video that spoke about the future doesn't just happen. It gets created. It gets made. And going about our business as usual, as we have done, will end up with us being dead as a country. And it's a bit grave, the wording that I'm using, but I think at the point, whoever is doing something needs to recognize that you have to do twice that amount for half the remuneration. Because we are no longer at the point where we can say, I will do that, but then I want this. Because eventually there's going to be nothing left. So that's my dire bit, my depressing bit. I think now we need to say, how do we get out of that? Okay? So what the risk report is trying to do is to give you a methodology, to give South African organizations a methodology that can bring the different efforts together and say, if we all fix our own problems, but in a way that support other people to fix their problems, then as organizations in the different sectors of the economy, we can start moving in the same direction, instead of all of us reinventing the wheel, doing things on our own, and possibly getting effort and wasting resources. So, I'm so glad, this is where you referred to the scenarios. So we picked the scenarios that we present in the report for a reason. If you look at the Ndlulamiti scenarios, they are very much about social cohesion, the debate around people, inequality, all of those things. In terms of what Dr. Frans Cronje presents, it's more about national policy, the economy, how do we make provision for us, monetary, etc., in the way forward. And Clear usually takes a much more global view and say, how does South Africa engage with the rest of the world? So we're saying, as IRMSA, put all of those together. So we are taking out of what other experts are doing and saying, to see the whole risk, how do we see all of these things interplay? And if you look at, okay, if we know this is where we are, how do we know which one is happening going forward? And what is happening is very easy to determine, because you, out of those scenarios, know what to look out for. So what we're doing in the report is we're saying, if leadership goes in a certain direction, we will end up in a specific scenario. Same with the others, institutional capacity, politics, social cohesion, national policy, equality, economy, all of these climate change and trends and climate change. All of these, if you wake up in the morning and you read the newspaper, you can find one of these flags and you know where we will head. And that's what we're saying to South Africa, is watch what's going on and make the adjustment when it is needed. So in the report, analyzing that, for the first time we're saying, you know what, we just almost in the middle scenario. We are no longer in that extremely red scenario. But the point is, if we let slip now just one of the balls we're keeping in the air, we will fall back to the red scenario. So the country, I think, has done great work, at a lot of effort, and it's getting us just over the line. So the issue now will be for us to show our staying power as a country and to say, how do we now make those efforts count and start building the other efforts? And obviously, as a risk manager, you'll know you never try and eliminate all risk at all cost. So we are saying, and we've indicated the ones in the report, where we think we need to get those to green. Some of the others that are less important, we can hang around with, but there are some things that is going to keep us from the blackberry bush. Okay. So once we know this picture, how do you use your risk management process to proactively influence the future, to make a different future happen? These are what we've done in the report is we've used the National Development Plan and the Economic Recovery Plan, and we said for each of the goals that we have as a country, and for the 10 flags and the scenarios where we find ourselves, will that goal happen by the time we are saying we will make it happen? And the answer is no. It's a very bleak block. The only thing that may have a green block is in terms of climate change, how are we going to present it going forward? So what we're saying then is, and this is probably the punchline of the report, if we don't fix the things in South Africa that are red, we will become a failed state. And we wrote this in the present for the punch that it will have. And I actually was convinced by my fellow RIC members to not state it in the uncertainty, because the point was made, we are that close to the blackberry bush. So South Africa, imagine South Africa becomes a failed state. There's a complete breakdown of any ethical and legal principles in society, and it's an unmanageable social unrest situation with a complete breakdown of the rule of law. If we don't have the skills, the capacity, the commitment, the competencies to build a new economy and to make recovery happen, we are facing large-scale disruption of utilities, and I'm not talking load shedding. Digital interruption of everything that enables the economic activity in South Africa. And that will just get us to a point where we are unable to retain our relevance to Africa. People will find other ways to get into Africa. And we won't address the impacts of climate change. And I think we think of climate change as somewhere there. It's here. It's today flooding people's houses. It's today making farming unprofitable. It's today causing floods and death. So in the report, what we're doing is we're saying, what are the key things, the 9 things? If you want to ask your board or at a national level, you're in your department, your accounting authority, your accounting executive, the thing you need to do as a country, if these things, we should probably get better. Quickly run through them. I think some of them has been very prominent now with the report, the release of the state capture report, but it's about taking action and enforcing consequences of governance. The second one, and it's maybe not expanded on there, but it's about governance structures, including for things like municipalities that have to now rule the coalition. How do we make it possible for those people to understand and to have a set of rules by which they can play? Rebuild our public institutions and protect our whistleblowers. I think we all, together with the legitimization of the law enforcement agencies, that is a no-brainer almost. It's like, get it in place and let's get it to happen. Number 6, if you remember the picture of the fish in the previous slide, it's about making ethical behaviors the norm. I think we live in a country where if you give your teenager a driving license and a car, you expect him to skip the robot. You're almost putting some money away for the speed fines. And it's become almost invisible to us. It's not something that we think about every day, but that is a critical building block. Appoint leaders, especially with relation to public and private partnerships. I think that is probably one of the key things coming out through the whole report. Strengthen education. I've made that bit blue for a region because it's about the skills. We will be there before this problem is fixed. So who's going to take over? How much time do you spend in mentoring and coaching your people, in getting them to the level where they can do what we need? And then the last one, change governance structures. And I think the president and the finance minister has done a great job in saying, how do we just get to a point where we can innovate, where we can build small businesses, where we can enable the economy? And before I hand over to Michael, this is for me a very critical quote. We should measure the prosperity of our nation, not by the number of millionaires, but by the absence of poverty, the prevalence of health, the efficiency of our public schools, and the number of people who can and do read good books. And I hope that the IRMSA risk report will be one of those things that you will read for the rest of this year. Thanks, guys. I'm going to hand over to Michael.
Thank you, Chriselle. Michael Davies, and This morning I'll be your guide to navigate and explain the IRMSA Risk Report South Africa Risks 2022. So great news for me is that after Jeremy, after Sizwe and after Christelle, the mood is so low, I can't stuff it up from here. It's only going to get better from here. So without further ado, as I say, I'll be your guide. Let me take you through the 2022 risk report. So my job this morning is to tell you how we got the information, what is it about, who is it for, why it, and what the relevance of this report. So firstly, the how is the IRMSA Risk Intelligence Committee. We're intricately involved, advisors the working group, and some of the Risk Intelligence Committee members were part of the working group. And then we had the thrust of it was the project working group to pull this all together. In the latter part of 2021, we did a risk survey, and we were very happy to have 633 respondents to that risk survey. And we've also taken opinion, thought, advice from 20 industry leaders and subject matter experts to get to what is now the risk report. Just a couple of maybe highlights or just a couple of comments on the risk survey we did. So the information coming in from our respondents, quite clearly we had a lot of support and response from Gauteng, followed by the Western Cape. And then interestingly, the other is IRMSA does have members and also non-members contributing to the survey. And we had information from Eswatini, Ghana, Lesotho, Alaska, Namibia, Nigeria, and Zimbabwe. So even a little further than just the borders of South Africa, while the context is South Africa, we had some insight from other countries as well. Then in terms of where did that information come from, I think it's great to see that in terms of the public sector, there was a great contribution. So between the private sector and the public sector, a pretty even distribution on the information coming in. And then academia and the professional bodies, we had some respondents there as well. Bearing in mind that a lot of IRMSA members will be representing companies when they respond as well. And then in terms of industry representation, it comes as no surprise, financial services was the largest to give us feedback, and then followed by government and public services and professional services. But it's encouraging to see that there's a wide perspective from quite a few sectors coming back through the risk survey that we did. So there's just some stats on the risk survey. In terms of how to read the report, so firstly there's the 4 sections. We have the section 1, South Africa risk context, and this is in what risk context must we build a better South Africa. Section 2 is the South Africa scenarios. How do we influence the future through better risk management? Section is top South Africa risks, where we delve a little deeper into some of the top risks that it was decided to place into the report. And section 4 is really important because this then pulls it into how do we address it, what skills, what competencies do we need, and how do we make them available and deploy them urgently. Right, so section 1, this is where we have great thought leadership from our industry leaders, and this is where the risk report is very interactive. I think it's quite funky. You have these photos in the report. You click on the icon where it says click here, and it'll take you into the interview that was done with the subject matter expert or the industry leader. So just some of the top topics in section 1 with global context, but bringing it back to South African context, is geopolitical tensions compounded by local political uncertainty. So geopolitical news of Ukraine this morning obviously has impact all around the world, and then we've got our own local context to it as well. Supply chain disruptions and localization opportunity, two things, and having a pandemic has obviously impacted supply chain for the last 2 years, and there's localization opportunity in this as well. Cyber threats is a perennial. We'll always see cyber threats in risks, whether it's a World Economic Forum risk forum, whether it's IT risks. It's always prevalent. The rise of ESG, environmental, social governance. From a World Economic Forum, from a global perspective, climate change and climate risk is high on the agenda. In a South African context, it almost comes back to what was discussed earlier, is the more immediate here and now. Let's deal with risks. But if we fail to recognize something like the rise of ESG, climate risk change, it will come and knock us on the back of the head before we know it. So some very important topics from section 1, and we've got great advice from the people we interviewed. Moving into section 2, and Christel has taken you through some of the aspects of section 2, which is the scenario plan in the multiple futures. How do we make a better future? And in terms of IRMSA's specified scenarios for the future, we have the 3 of perpetual hangover, fake it until we make it or not, and owning our future. Which then moves into section 3, and this is where we unpack top risks to South Africa. We have subject matter experts, we have great insight, and to go through them, so we are now in the report. So risks that were looked at, reviewed, have insight with, South Africa becomes a failed state, complete breakdown of ethical and legal principles across society, unmanageable societal unrest and breakdown of rule of law, large-scale disruption of economic activity relying on stable supply of utilities, large-scale interruption of digital-enabled services and economic activity, debilitating loss of trade benefits through SA ports into Africa. And if we just look back at the last year, I'm sure the events are triggering every single risk we go through. There's certain events they say, well, they materialize, and we can see things happen behind this. And then the last one, inadequate response to current and future climate change impacts. So a lot to unpack, and as I said, our experience, and what really comes through as a highlight in the report is the urgency to act. And it's been said a couple of times this morning already, in terms of these risks are not new, but where we are in terms of them materializing and our urgency to act has changed. And I do like Cesar's thought about what are we going to do differently? That's it, get rid of the orthodoxy and move into different. Right, a little bit more of detail into the section 3 and how section 3 is constructed. You'll see we do have the facts and figures and expert opinion. We look at the top challenges. We look at treatment, the options, also opportunity. And that's why Smiley Face, I can actually bring mood of this place up this morning, is that Smiley Face says, we've actually got great success stories. So through the risk report, you will see there are success stories. And Professor Benang Mahali was one of our contributors. And he's got a great statement, is that as South Africans, we've gone to the precipice many times, and we've always managed to draw back. And we are resilient. But it does come back to what are we going to do differently moving forward. We've got great success stories. There are opportunities. In every adversity, there's opportunity. And those are the things we need to look at. In addition, per risk, we've looked at where are we in terms of the scenarios, what are the flags, where are we currently, and should the risk materialize, what's the future of those flags. So that's a lot more detail in section 3. And then just for a cheat sheet, if you want something out of this morning, this is a great one where we talk about the interrelation and interdependency of the risks. And if we manage to improve certain risks, they will have a positive effect on the other risks, leading to a better future. So that's actually captured in the executive summary, not in section 3, but it's a great piece of information to refer to. And then we get to IRMSA's call to action. about urgency, it's about doing it right now, and what are we going to do. So let's build that competency profile. What are the benefits of having that correct risk management competency profile, and then how do we deliver it? And then lastly, some thanks, my personal thanks to our working group, so to Christelle, Mark, Niso, Tatalwa, Chris, Vilna, Walter, Chandu, Kobus, who spent many a late night, tell you that much, Lisha. This is the working group that brought it together, is that there were many contributors to the report, and it's a great insight, but this is the team that all brought it together. And thank you to the sponsor in ARG and our brand sponsor Cura, and Cura is also the sponsor of the ebook. The ebook is great, it's funky, it's interactive, it's a great read. So really wrapping up now with report sponsors. Again, thank you to all the sponsors. Without them, this report would not be able to be delivered. And then also our report partners who contributed. So in order to go forward, I'd like to finish off with a quote from Thuli Madonsela. So we are resilient. We can do it, but we need to work together to build the South Africa we want. So thank you. I've hopefully given you the great outline. You can navigate, and just to absolutely finally end off on is this report. We know the why. We know the environment that we're in. Is who is this report for? Well, it's for you. It's for anyone who has an interest in South Africa. It's for executives. It's for leaders of industry. It's for managers. It will become an essential tool in order to help them take the organization into the future. So I hope you enjoy it. Well, not necessarily enjoy the report, but get great insight and value that you can take into your organizations and into your own individual daily life. So thank you very much.
Michael, thank you very much indeed. Christelle, thank you indeed. You'll join me on the panel in just a moment. You know, there was a survey that was put out recently describing the national characteristics of different countries. Norway was happy. Britain was plucky. The French were arrogant. The Australians were energetic. And South Africans were called resilient. It's an admirable trait, but wouldn't it be nice if we were known for something else, that we didn't have to be resilient all the time? I thought I'd just land that. It can be very exhausting sometimes, being resilient all the time. I really enjoyed the video. Thank you very much indeed. I did look up on the website, the Johannesburg Skydiving Club. If you want to do a static line jump, 1,540 Rand, good luck to you. But here's a classic example of risk mitigation that in case of bad weather, it would be cancelled. And there is a 65% chance of rain later on today. What you would also want to know, perhaps, if you're interested in blackberry bushes, they need full sun. Takes 2 years to bear fruit, and are entangled with thorns, which is obviously what that guy was worrying about. Folks, we're gonna get to the panel in just a moment. But before we get there, my late mother always used to say, if you've been overlaid with tough information, bad news, nothing nicer than settling yourself with a bit of breakfast. She was a great believer in that. So we're going to settle ourselves with a little bit of breakfast. Give you about 15 minutes, and we'll serve some breakfast. While we're doing that, and I'm very cognizant of the fact that we're also online as well, to our delegates, as I look straight at the camera, to our delegates who have joined us online, this would be your opportunity to get yourself a cup of tea and a sticky bun, if you want to. And while we're doing that, we're also going to play some excerpts from an interview that we did, essentially setting up the risk report from the Institute of Futures Research. We'll listen to Dr. Morne Mostert while we, in the live setting, settle ourselves with a little bit of breakfast. The panel discussion straight after that. Yeah. The Institute for Risk Management in South Africa's annual risk report provides important and insightful information for all decision makers in organizations in South Africa. The 8th edition of this report is out in February 2022. What can I tell you about it? Well, it will build on IRMSA's role as a catalyst for positive, meaningful change in South Africa. And that's all reflected in the theme hashtag Step Up. Now is the time. One of the supporters of the report is Dr. Morne Mostert from the Institute for Futures Research at Stellenbosch University and joins me now. Morne, a very warm welcome. It's good to see you again. Before we talk about the big local and global risk landscapes, King 4, you've just made an important presentation to the King 4 committee. What was the top line?
Thanks, Jeremy. My main argument with the thought leadership group of the King Commission is that a lack of discerning strategic foresight is poor corporate governance. And if I may be so bold, I suspect that in the next few years, that will be a legislated requirement, that foresight work, so-called vigilant firms, companies that deliberately examine the future, that kind of practice should be an essential requirement for good governance in large organizations.
Why do you think there's a lack of foresight?
Well, I base that in part on research in various organizations, and also, Jeremy, in my own practice in advisory work, not only in 11 or 12 countries in Africa, but also in Europe, in Geneva, and Paris, and Rome, and London, and so on, and a lot of it in the Middle East. And what I can tell you, Jeremy, on the ground, in practice, even senior executives, even top executives are absolutely consumed with the matters of the day and the 90-day reporting cycle. While that, in a certain sense, is responsible behavior towards investors, analysts, and the like, the dilemma is that it removes the view from the longer-term responsibility that large organizations have towards their shareholders, towards their staff, towards their suppliers, other stakeholders, but also towards the broader society and indeed the planet.
Let me take a contrary view, if I can, just to stimulate the conversation. And let me put to you, Morne, that the paradigm is shifting so quickly all the time that it has become almost impossible to develop that foresight that you're talking about, that we're almost held hostage by that 90-day cycle.
Yes, Jeremy, I would say that is an intellectually lazy escape from the responsibilities. And here's my argument. Of course, it's true that the change is happening all the time. And as strategic foresight students, we are not concerned with predicting the future. So this is an important distinction to make. Prediction is not, in fact, our main objective. What we try to recognize is that more than one future is possible, and a responsible practice on corporate governance and risk management is to investigate those multiple possible futures. And then, very importantly, to allow those insights to inform longer-term strategy. So here's the biggest distinction between traditional strategy and strategic foresight. It is this, that in traditional strategy, we have an as-is state, an analysis of the day, and then some sort of ambition for the future. Of course, that's encouraging, that's fantastic, we should go somewhere. The difference between that and strategic foresight is that the latter recognizes that more than one future is possible. In other words, in traditional strategy, you are exposing the organization to the risk of examining only one future, a single future, which you think you are the sole author of, when in reality, now to come back to the substance of your question, in reality, the changes are so myriad that ignoring those changes in how they shape the future, I argue, is irresponsible.
So how then do executive teams need to apply their mind to developing that strategic foresight? What are the questions that they need to be asking of themselves and stakeholders within their broader operating landscape?
I think you're so right to start there with the questions, Jeremy. That's our main argument. It really is about the quality of the questions. What are those questions? We recognize that the past is important. And in fact, we use a little acronym known as OPACH. So we say, if you want to make sense of the past for future purposes, you can look at that acronym OPACH, which is an indication of the origins. Where does the place come from? So think about the birth of South Africa, highly contentious question, right? Or the birth of your institution. That gives you some sense of the kind of the DNA of the place. Then to look at patterns, those behaviors that we repeat again and again and again. Attitudes are kind of emotional reactions to things. We like certain things, dislike others. The T is for traditions, the way we celebrate our rituals, how we reward people, and so on. The C is for culture, and that means both institutional culture as well as regional, even ethnic culture when it comes to globalization. And then the H is for habits. Habits is a really interesting one, because one way to define a habit is that a habit is something that you do without thinking. Now, we can then wonder, well, if you accept that definition, Jeremy, then what is a thinking habit? Well, this is an instance where you think that you're thinking strategically, but in fact, there's very little thinking going on. It's in fact a copy and paste of last year, plus more or less 8% and cut costs by 6%. Then just those questions on the present, they're really about what we call a transdisciplinary scan, looking far and wide, including beyond your own industry. And I can say a little bit more about that if you want. And then just briefly on the questions for the future, we want to think about what happens when these multiple factors that you mentioned start to intersect. At those intersections, at a distant horizon, beyond the normal planning horizon of, let's say, 1 to 3 years, at 10 years, let's say, when those multiple forces intersect, what kind of pictures do they start to paint about the future? Those, I would say, are the fundamental questions.
So let me ask you this then as a follow-up. Let's assume that you get the answers to those questions that you have posed. How do you make that strategic foresight then part of your living and operating strategy?
Right. Here's what we find. When people look at the future, the way they think about the future changes. It's really quite bizarre. Let me give you a practical example. In one study, test subjects were asked to look at themselves, photographs of themselves 30 years from today. So with software, their faces were aged and so on. And what was fascinating in that study is that subjects that did not see themselves 30 years from today were much less likely to invest in their own pension funds as those who did see themselves 30 years from today. In other words, in a sense, they were seeing something of the future, not an exact prediction, but the mere consideration of the future changes the kind of decisions we make today. So that's the first thing. How does that then translate into strategy? Well, it means that it changes the way we think about the strategic objectives we have. Far beyond, of course, outdated notions of business being purely for profit, to consider a much more holistic view of how the future might unfold. Consider, Jeremy, the impact organizations have had on our planet over the last 60 years. The fact that we do kind of last year plus 8% means the conversation is devoid of considerations of social impact, of environmental impact, and we can see the effect of that short-termism around us today. So the temptation, though, I must say, of that short-termism is enormous. It's really the sort of default option. Look at the spreadsheet, look at what's gone up or down in the last 3 years, pick the one you think is your favorite and the most viable, add 8% to that, add a stretch target with some bonuses for executives, and off you go, gung-ho, launch it at the convention center with balloons and doves and half-naked acrobats, and off we go. Well, I would say we're in a time now where we just can no longer afford to think of strategy like that.
I understand that, but I'm assuming that you've also got to have one eye on that short-term horizon.
Yeah.
And this informs this question. What, in your opinion, then, for 2022 are the significant emerging strategic risks that organizations need to be applying their mind to? In other words, in the here and now.
Yes. So you formulated the dilemma quite articulately. So it is considering in the here and now what is not yet in the here and now. That is the dilemma. So I would say that if we start in the macro environment, then just right off the bat, if you don't have your relationship with society very well articulated, we're exposing organization to enormous risk. That means thinking about the role that your institution plays in society. If you're a mine, you're burning coal or whatever it is, you need to really think about what does that mean for the people around me. Very closely linked to that, of course, is the environmental impact. We've gone far beyond now the idea that somehow climate is for long-haired hippies and tree huggers. This is now a matter of survival and considering your footprint on the planet and how, in fact, you contribute to reduce your own footprint in a hyper-aggressive way. We're rapidly running out of time, I would say, is another imperative. Then looking at the broader demographics, I would say, if you look at Africa, for example, in its demographic profile, I would say it is responsible to consider your relationship on a specific segment of society, and that is the youth. We have an emerging demographic bubble, potentially known as a demographic dividend, which means an increasing number of people of working age, as in a ratio of those who are of dependent age. That is potentially a dividend, but if we do not pay specific attention to that, that will end up being a tax. Of course, In addition to society, both the broader society, the environment, and the youth, I would say we need to think about the finance mechanisms around our institutions. In other words, what the Club of Rome calls rethinking finance. And that includes how people get access to finance to make use of our goods and services. If we don't rethink that, we are perpetuating the vast discrepancies and inequalities, not only in South Africa, but all around the world. And then the broader economic role that we play in an attempt to reframe our economic contribution, I think, is absolutely essential. Now, you may say, gosh, I'm an executive in a company that makes bottles. Why should I concern myself with all of this? Well, one of the reasons is that, in fact, the society and the environment are already funding your business. You don't make the water you use. You get it from the planet. You don't make your own consumers. They trust you and engage with you. So for far too long, I think institutions have had a kind of corporate agnosticism where they could say, well, we're only in the game of, advancing the interests of our shareholders and, maybe being a little bit responsible here and there. The time for that has now truly run out. And if we don't take it seriously, here I'll close this observation, Jeremy. If we don't take it seriously, what we have to pay attention to is the international business world is taking these issues increasingly seriously. And that means we will become isolated if we don't do it ourselves.
And let me finish then with this question. You have raised big, important topics, but in the next year or so, what is the potential for all of that to be ambushed, derailed, set off course by the pandemic?
One of the risks that I've identified in the global landscape is the possibility for some governments as well as large organizations to respond opportunistically with regards to COVID. And in that sense, COVID poses an enormous risk, but of course it's really our response to it. So what do I mean? For governments, that means policy opportunism. That little policy, perhaps borderline dictatorship policy that's been lying in my top drawer for the last 18 months, I can now hide the explanation for that policy behind COVID. I can now introduce my own biases into policy and explain it away because of COVID in the same way that some countries have done, for example, with the interest of national security. Once you use that phrase, the discussion is over. There's no more intellectual engagement. You don't have to explain yourself. So in the same way, I think there is a risk for policy opportunism, especially in those kind of borderline dictatorships, some benevolent autocracies that really want to engineer a society in a very specific way. For institutions, the risk is to explain bad service simply because of, let's say, supply chain dilemmas, because of, guess what, COVID. And I think one of the imperatives for boards is to hold executives responsible by, and this is another dimension of strategic foresight, hold executives responsible by being competitor conscious. So in other words, if executives say, well, our supply chain's being disrupted, that's why we have this kind of service to our stakeholders, well, this is why we haven't paid attention to the environment. Well, let's look at competitive behavior. In that way, our contextual awareness defines the kind of decisions we make. I think essential for risk management in the future.
And that is a salutary warning about the dangers of expediency as well. And I appreciate you, Dr. Mordenstedt from the Institute for Futures Research at Stellenbosch University. Always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Loved it. Thanks, Jeremy.
Folks, I'd like to start proceedings again, if I may. Just 2 points before we get into the panel discussion. I am a font of useless information, but given that this is a risk breakfast, your risk of a heart attack increases by about 11% if you have a high cholesterol breakfast every morning. So Billy, don't look at me like that, because I know you're having a superlicious day. But this is the one for the week, eh? Tomorrow, bran muffins for all of you. The second point I want to make, folks, is the risk report itself, as you were enjoying your breakfast, has dropped into your inboxes right now, so you have it. And I wish you lots of engaged reading as far as that is concerned. As I said in my introduction earlier this morning, it is an important primer in terms of planning. Let me remind you of those 9 risks that are outlined in the report. And this will inform to a greater or lesser extent our conversation. South Africa becomes a failed state, a complete breakdown of ethical and legal principles, unmanageable social unrest, complete economic collapse, lack of skills to enable economic growth, large-scale disruption of economic activity because of a failure of utilities, corruption of digitally enabled services, loss of paid benefits because of problems at ports in South Africa, and an inadequate response to current and future climate change impacts. It's an important list. I want to call to the stage now as we begin our panel discussion. Christelle, I've already introduced you, but if you can join us again, I'm just going by the list that I've got. So Christelle Marais, if you'll join us. Mark Victor, if you'll come up, please. Also part Deloitte Africa, ERM and ESG leader. Okay, Totelwa Dodo from the National Treasury. Totelwa, welcome to you. Kaniso, there you are. Kaniso Mtembo from the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. And Advocate Andy Motibe from the Special Investigating Unit. You know, I'm always very pleased when we can't get hold of him immediately, because it could conceivably mean that his organization is arresting someone, which is a good thing, given what Sizwe was talking about in terms of corruption a little earlier on. Folks, the way in which I want to do this, I will lead the conversation, and to all of you, a very warm welcome. I'm going to sit down and not loom over you. But at any point, if you need to raise your hand, if you need to challenge, if you need to ask a question, do it, and I'm very happy to bring you into the conversation. One of the things that I did ask all of you to think about during the breakfast break was, what can we do differently? And that I need us to start seeding that into the conversation. But let me start with you, if I may. One of the issues that is of concern that would inform all of those 9 risks that I've just mentioned is the issue of leadership when it comes to looking at the current risk profile as far as South Africa is concerned. How worried are you? Where are the deficiencies? And what sort of corrective action needs to be accelerated?
Thank you, Jeremy, and good morning and good day to everybody. I think that's quite an important question. So if I just think about it, for me at a leadership level, we really need to get to a point where political leaders go beyond political interests. For me, I think that's quite important at this stage of our life in South Africa. We need to get to a point where political interests are not as significant as the direction that the country is going in. And for me, one of the key instruments that are going to facilitate that, especially again, if you consider the fact that the July unrest were actually quite an important indicator of an awakening citizenry in South Africa. And so even if political leadership were to insist on doing things the way that they've always done them, that is now proven. It's proven now that it's not sustainable, because then the voting citizens will determine the way forward from then on. So I think for me that's important. And one of the key instruments, if I just think about the outcomes of the elections in November 2021, one of the key instruments that are going to potentially help change that is if we immediately look at a governance framework that's going to enable the workings of coalitions in a manner that is structured, where they hold themselves, each other accountable, and it's not just about political party interests. I still want to think of myself as young, and so being
Can we just pause there?
Yeah.
I speak on behalf of everyone in this room when I say she's young.
Thank you.
You thought I was going to say something different. Hey?
Thank you. One of the things that I, as a fairly person, think needs to change is, okay, firstly, let me position it in this way. As I sit and observe, I look at this gap between those that are in leadership and those that they are leading. So if you look at the age gap, and the fact that they're no longer really introducing new ideas in the system. So it's doing the same way that we've always done them, maybe tweaking the plans here and there. And so I feel like one of the things that really needs to change is we need new breed in the form of younger leaders who are going to, turn things around from the way in which, they think to how they execute. Because I say, no longer what worked a couple of years ago is no longer going to work, and that's proven.
Mark Victor, at the end of the stage, is it poor leadership or the inability to innovate?
I think it's a combination. Well, if you look at leadership, it's a critical success factor in every facet. It's not just public sector; it's corporate. It's raising kids. It's everything. So actually, leadership is the glue that actually I think will drive success or failure. There's a number of other dimensions that maybe I'll get to innovation now that speak to that. Trust. Are you building a trusted environment, corporate, private, public, etc. I liked what was said earlier, that collective, the network. So, just building on what you said about resilience. Resilience is about, being able to manage and sort of stay true and survive, but it's also about innovation. It's about thinking differently. It's about, considering other ways of doing it. And some of that is about the youth. It's about new thinking, new ways, Gen Z, etc. But some of it is also about reinventing ourselves collectively, everyone. We need to collectively take accountability. We need to innovate. We need to try different things. And most of all, importantly, we need to actually take accountability and lead.
But Tilwa, are we just unable to innovate, or are we frightened of it? Because we're more comfortable with the status quo.
We're not comfortable, evidently, otherwise we wouldn't have been here. So I like what...
I just came for the breakfast.
So I like what Jennifer mentioned when she said we need new leaders, we need new solutions, because we have old leaders, old solutions to new problems. So, and when I want to say we're not comfortable, we sort of don't have access to changing as well. So we because of how things are designed. So we've got political leaders who think like they thought in 1994, who don't make way for innovation. So we want to be there, we want to change things, we don't have access. So there's a term in Xhosa that says makuqalelweni. So we need to start afresh, review if the structure still works, if this political government structure partnerships work, and think of how it could work, because we've tried it, we've tested it, it doesn't work. It's just getting worse.
But that sounds very good in theory, doesn't it? Where do you start?
Okay, we start where we are. We start with, a lot of people have mentioned that to start addressing things urgently. We start where we are, we address things urgently, we bring out issues. We are bold about what issues are, we are truthful about what those issues are, we bring in solutions. Once, of course, obviously we'll have to use the people that are in here to sort of stabilize. Once we stabilize, then we start slowly but surely changing how things are built, how things are done, and how things eventually look.
But we've run out of time. The frog's already boiled.
Hence, I'm saying we need to stabilize first. Unfortunately, some solutions are long-term solutions. Now we need to, we do have somewhere, not necessarily in leadership, but that somewhere we do have food soldiers that are keen, that are innovative, that are young. So we start utilizing those as well. Once things have stabilized, then we start changing the ball game.
Still, isn't it easy just to say it's a leadership issue, because then it takes it away from us? It's out there, it's somebody else's problem. What's your understanding of how we need to change leadership?
I think, Jeremy, you may have read my mind now, because I'm thinking, who's they? Who's the them? And to Mark's point, we have a country where you have a bunch of child-led households. Those are leaders. They are putting food on another person's table. We have the generation that now finished degrees, the 23 to 25 to 27-year-olds. They are leading. They're just not doing it with us. They are the young people who take their businesses out of the country when they're ready, when some partner wants them to join them. So I think it's not that we have a lack of leadership. We are just not utilizing the leadership's roles that we have because of our orthodox paradigm. We think the leader must be somebody I voted in and that now sits in parliament. We think the leader is the executive or the CEO or the board. But where you are, you're going to start doing something to make your own life better. And I think the key message for me is, if we all do that, let's try and do it in the same direction, get the frog out of the well, while saying, now I'm building capacity. I don't think, I don't think we have much time to stabilize and then. We now need to now say, who's the 23-year-old I can pull in and teach? And understand that we all have to give much more than we gave before. I think for me, leadership is start here and do the thing you need to do.
What I'm also hearing from you is that the momentum that you're talking about, particularly when it comes to younger South Africans, has bypassed and has accelerated beyond the status quo of leadership that we know right now. So are we wasting our time even talking about it? Because it's happening, and so many of us don't even know that it's, certainly of my generation, we're probably not even aware of the change that's happening. People are fed up, they're tired, they're moving on. They've given up hope in the status quo. Is that what you're saying?
I think they're making their own lives without us. And I think if 75% of parliament is older than 65, by the time they retire, these people will be leading the country. And whether we like where they're leading it to should be none of our concern, because we didn't bring them in. So then live with what we've created. So it sounds very bad, but people are, I think, if you listen and you follow Twitter feeds and you listen to commentary, people are saying, oh, sorry, I'm now doing it my own thing here. So I think that's a bit of a risk we're taking in the sense that we may become irrelevant if we think we are the leaders.
Okay. So let me ask you this. So let's look at the 9 risks then. Look at the first one. We've heard this so often before. South Africa becomes a failed state. Some say we're already a failed state. How do we mitigate against that? How do we manage that risk?
So the report does put forward a number of possibilities that we should explore. Certainly, maybe it's important
Are we at failed state status already, according to the report?
We are this close. We are this close.
What is that close?
It's very close.
Okay.
But I think to understand.
So this is important, everybody. I know we're laughing a little bit here, but according to what kind? I mean, there are many different definitions of a failed state, aren't there?
Yeah. Okay. So exactly. So I actually wanted to cover that because I think the what's important is to look at what drives that. How do we arrive at that? And I may not give an entire full list, and I'm happy for my colleagues to also add. But I think when it's functioning appropriately, you need all the different arms of state to be playing their part and playing their part effectively. Now we've seen a number of cracks. If you think, and especially at executive level, which is at the heart of service delivery, which is at the heart of implementation. But we also have been seeing cracks in the judicial system as well. We've seen rise in anarchy, and the recent report that was released around the July unrest really does make you concerned around, our ability or the ability of law enforcement agencies to play their part. So effectively, I'm just saying that those are some of the indicators, right, that make you worry that we potentially may not be as stable as we want from an arms of state perspective. But then, of course, what then compounds all of this, as I've said, executive arm, service delivery, high unemployment, leading to people taking law on. So who's in charge here, right? Who's in charge? If people can decide, okay, today we're waking up, we're going to close off the roads, etc. No one's going to school, etc., etc. Unrest in July is estimated to have cost about 50 billion, right? And that's just one example, one of the drivers. If you think about the crippling blackouts, critical infrastructure blackouts, and what those cost the economy. So we've got these elements that are continuously rising and making you wonder, what is this a state that is busy collapsing? Where SMMEs can't survive. It is estimated that I think about 5 out of 7 no less than that, in fact, are able to make it within 1 year, right? We have one of the highest recorded failures of SMMEs. Now, why that is important to underline here as well is the fact that it is a known fact that they are key contributors to job creation. So when the environment is actually not stimulated for them to continue to provide employment, it means we are in this state where there's unemployment, there's poverty levels that are high, inequality, state is not coming into the party. And it sounds like it's very extreme, but take a step back and ask yourself, are we not seeing all of these things?
Fair enough. Mark Victor, let me ask you this question then. Because the quote is either attributed to the commentator Justice Malala, or he wrote about it, quoting someone else, I can't remember. But it went something along the lines of, it's not really going to get better, but it's never as bad as we think. So using the failed state risk as an overhang, are we going to wake up one morning and tune into Eyewitness News and the lead story will be, today we've become a failed state? Or are we just going to muddle along and we're not really, we're kind of there, but we're not there, but back to this dreadful word resilience. Are we not always just going to manage through resilience? You understand what I'm saying? I mean, it's a lot of verbal soup there, but
I do. I mean, the reality is, let's take the downgrade. That was always seen as a, kind of, that was going to cause massive outflows. ultimately.
But it didn't really, did it?
No, it didn't. Well, there were, but it's relative to global
really,
investment, exactly. But the point is that, I think, are we going to continue to muddle along, takes our orders? Are we carrying on, not going anywhere, maybe slow decline? Or are there things that will really sort of help to change the reality? It's not an easy answer. Some of the conversations we've had already about during the day about social inequality, etc. It's not like there's an easy formula that's been applied somewhere else and it's just going to work. It's actually a complex environment, and I agree with you. It isn't about putting your head in the sand and saying, "Look, we failed. We might as well just move overseas." We can't do that. We need to do everything we can. And it's that collective, for me, that's critical. It's both the public sector, it's the private sector, it's every individual that needs to drive that. It's that resilience in terms of SMMEs, as was mentioned. It's ultimately, even if you fail, do you try? Do you try and build up a business? And that for me is the way that we need to drive things.
So tell you what are we afraid of by saying we are a failed state? Why can't we just say it, lance the boil, and move on?
Okay, so I mean, very interesting conversation with a colleague. We're talking about how broke we are, and he mentioned that, but you're in the top 10%.
So you're talking about the country, not individually?
No, individually. So I'm trying to.
I know you work for National Treasury. Don't worry.
So individually, so he was like, but you're in the top 10% of the richest people in the country. So that was a shocker. As poor as I am, the statistics say that I'm in the top 10% of the richest people in the country. So it makes you think and wonder if what do we need more to happen to realize that we are just going down and we are sinking, and it's going to be extremely difficult to get up again. So now think of.
So what's your threshold point? When do we fall over?
When we start, when we start reporting on numbers of people who die of poverty. and we take it as seriously as we have taken the pandemic. So that would be when we realize that we have really failed as a state.
Do you have data that you can share with us in that respect?
Not on my gadget, unfortunately.
So what about you? I mean, this failed state debate. Where do you stand on that?
So I think I have a bit of a clearer timeline in my head, and it's worrying because when we were finalizing the report,
Does it involve a blackberry bush?
No, but it could well. So the blackberry bush, I think, is about 2 years away. When we looked at the report, we said, let's look at the medium-term strategy framework and look at NDP 2030. So you have 2024 and 2030. I think 7 out of the 9 risks we feel will materialize by 2024, which should get you by 2030, maybe to now
So
it's
7
broken.
of the 9, so which will materialize then?
I think the only 2 was climate change and I can't remember the other one. But the thing is, I think, Jeremy, for me, there's also some famous quote that I don't know who said it, but how did you get bankrupt? Gradually and then suddenly. So I think we're at the end of the gradually and at the beginning of the suddenly. So I think even if you ask yourself, which of the medium-term strategy framework goals will we make? Which of the ERP goals will we make? And which of the NDP goals will we make? Almost none by the times we gave ourselves. And those timelines were determined to say, how do we save us from a failed state? So if we're not going to make those timelines, we're definitely becoming a failed state.
And just to add to that 2030 target is really a target on paper, right? Because if you consider what's happening, the society is demanding a lot more, such that the time frame is actually much shorter than that. It's just nice to say we've got that timeline, but really we should be working actively at closing the gaps that are obvious now. We don't have up to 2030.
So what gap would you close first?
It's a challenging one, but I think we want to target unemployment because that's really is the crux of the problem. We want to address that, but we also want to address skills.
Sorry, absolutely. So let's take unemployment.
Yeah.
Huge risk in this country. Let's talk about that. So we want to target unemployment. We want to address unemployment. You had the finance minister yesterday allocating more money to different initiatives. So again, it just seems to me that it's a flywheel that spins. So if you're the minister of closing the gap when it comes to unemployment, let's talk about unemployment. Where would you make a small difference? What do we need to do? Given that the whole thing about it's not up to government to create jobs, it's up to government to create the environment. Where would you start? Let's talk about unemployment. Big risk.
Yeah, so it's not up to government, but to your point, the environment creation lies squarely with them. So that policy certainty that businesses require is important. And big ups to the president for announcing that they're going to be trying to work towards really streamlining the processes and removing the burden, for businesses. So that is quite important. But I think then.
But we've heard the same thing for the past 5 years.
Well, this time he's appointed someone to actively look at it. So hopefully that's going to work. But I think then companies, some companies, in fact, I believe are actively looking at how they help businesses that are up and running at the moment. How do we help them accelerate? So I'll make use of the JSE as an example. We've got this enterprise acceleration program that we've recently launched, which really targets medium-sized companies and really analyzing them, understanding their unique needs to helping them grow further, and then providing whatever is required in order to drive that acceleration for them. So whether it's coaching, but those are some of the examples.
So let's flip the debate then. So you've got the Accelerate program. What's the commonality of need that these organizations are crying out for help? Because the moment you give them that help, I imagine they'll be able to create more job opportunities. Am I right?
Absolutely.
So what do they need?
So some of it includes what we spoke about this morning around the labor laws. We need to revisit those to make it easier for them to be able to employ, but also when they need to terminate relationships for reasons that are cogent, then they should be able to do so. And that's without, of course, suggesting that people should be exploited, right? So I'm approaching it from that perspective. So that's one of them. The second one is around capital raising, really enabling them to be able to raise capital and get access to the funding that they require in order for them to be able to continue with their activities. Those are the ones I can think of for now. And of course, all of this is happening within a context of what I mentioned earlier on around blackouts that also tend to impact their ability to produce. So it kind of is a complex problem in that sense, because as much as you enable them on the one hand, but they need the infrastructure, the critical infrastructure for them to produce and be able to sustain jobs. So it becomes tricky.
Let me choose my words here carefully. And if I'm misinterpreting you or misquoting you, throw something at me.
I
It's
shall.
not your iPad though, is it? Whose iPad is it?
Everybody, I've got my son's iPad. Spider-Man. I shouldn't have told him.
No, the reason why I asked you that is maybe Spider-Man would help us here. What you're saying about employment is make it easier, or adjust the labor laws to make it easier to downsize if you have to. Is that what you're saying? Okay. In other words, make it easier to fire people. Work with me, okay? So, Mark, coming to you, okay, understand the labor laws are sometimes very tricky and dense and create difficulties. But how do you balance that streamlining against the historical problems of the past, where we have such a high unemployment rate anyway? It's difficult to get rid of people. You've got to find the sensitivity. And there's Advocate Andy Motibe, everybody. Andy, good morning.
He's on mute.
Very much for having me.
We'll get to you in just a moment, but I'm putting a tricky question to Mark here. How do you find that balance between, the streamlining on the one hand and, dealing with historical disparity on the other?
For me, it's more about ease of business. It's not in and of itself getting rid of people more easily. It's ease of business. How quickly can a one-man show set up a business, get registered, have all the support in terms of administration and all of those things to be able to get on the go and access to markets, etc. So I don't think it's a one-dimensional view of simple labor law. We have to acknowledge that ultimately we need to employ more people, even with the challenge around digitization and automation. Actually, it's about creating more productivity and more economic activity. So, are we focusing on the right areas in the economy? I know the president's been speaking about agriculture for ages. That's an area that can create a lot of produce that everyone needs. You can export, etc. So where are the investments being made, and are we allowing or enabling business owners to actually do business easier? Because then ultimately it's actually less about how easily can you flex your workforce. It's more about being able to actually get on with it, be successful, and grow your business.
So what would you change tomorrow then?
It's a difficult question because it is about all the policies and the frameworks and stuff. But I think it's about how do we understand the unique value in the country where we can produce, whether that's industrial, whether it's agricultural, and what are the sort of support structures to put in place so that we actually grow that. And then I agree with the point about triple Ps. It's a very powerful opportunity. Corporates are realizing the importance of connecting the dots between what they do in their, in their primary business and how they can support suppliers and develop communities around them. But it's actually about maximizing.
I mean, a lot of progress has been made. You're saying,
well, is it enough? Is the question,
I'm asking you.
Obviously not.
Jeremy, I think...
Advocate Motibe, I'm getting to you now. Crystal, just finish that thought.
I think we need to be much more radical. If tomorrow we paid the social grant, and sorry, Mark, for picking on you, to Deloitte, and say to Deloitte, the same people I would have paid this grant to, you now employ and pay them exactly this amount. What I want from you, I give the money, I'm government, what I want from you is to teach this person so that when he's done with whatever, 2 years, 3 years, I don't need to pay him the grant anymore. He's now employable. So I'm not at the policies, the legislation, that's there because we choose it to be there. We can change it. And I think that's the level where we are at. If we get to more values-based versus rule-based, creating more rules gets us deeper into the hole. So I'm at that level of just think out of the box and rather say, I can work with a guy out of matric, let me teach him, like somebody taught me to make photocopies when I started my job. So I think there's more options here.
Yes, better pay Deloitte than McKinsey. Huh? Sorry, too soon? Advocate Motibe, a very warm welcome to our discussion. You're talking to an audience of about 50 or 60 people, and we're looking at you at a big screen. And my question to you is a very simple one. I want to come back to the issue of leadership. What's the relationship between poor leadership and the corruption problem we have in the country?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity. We had a connectivity issue, so we really apologize for the late. But that's your question. There's a direct between poor leadership and the rampant corruption that we are seeing in our society. And I'm saying society both public and private, and just generally in society. We've observed, we have really observed that when they say ethical leadership is very important, the ethics should run across the organization, in fact, run across the society, where there is a clear indication that at the leadership level, there's recklessness or negligence or wanton disregard of policies and processes. It trickles down. The long adage of saying the fish comes from the head. We have seen it across most of our investigations. The evidence really points that where there has been irregularities, where there has been evidence of corruption, you'll find that it really points to at all levels of the organization. And I'm talking both from public and private. So there will be the most important part in the whole process of turning the country around in the fight against corruption. It starts at the leadership level. We need ethical leadership. We need leadership that's focused on ensuring that the state governance, and in that way, will we be able to be as exemplary so that trickling down is the whole good governance, good processes, and you will see that all of those whom we've got the privilege to lead will really follow. But my view is not all lost. We've got a big opportunity to turn the situation around. But most important is that all of us as leaders, and I'm talking at all levels of society, all of us as have to demonstrate that commitment to really fight corruption. What we do, where it's detected and where it's found, we have to make sure that we act. We've heard the cry of the public in saying we need to act speedily in all aspects of our fight against corruption. And if we talk the fight waged by the law enforcement agencies, we talk in all aspects. As SIU, we've really demonstrated that we can take the process from finding corruption, finding irregularity, and take it up to the courts, special tribunal, and recover the monies, and all of those contracts are set aside. But there's this aspect which we must really work together to ensure that it also, executes to the satisfaction of the public. That is criminal prosecution, and end up with people who are guilty being found guilty and sentenced accordingly. Of course, there's also that part of holding those officials to account who are guilty in the process. But this whole system, there's a myriad of factors, that have influenced it. Poor leadership, the culture of impunity, just lack of, ethical leadership, poor governance, wanton disregard of processes. So our strive and our resolve is to turn that around, right? Ensure that we appoint capable leaders, because we are in the process of building a capable state, capable leaders, and ensure that we really strive for clean governance where there is appropriate consequence management. So from a leadership perspective, I do agree or comment to your question and say there is a direct link. Poor leadership produces poor results. Unethical leadership, you will find an unethical environment. So we, as I say, we need to turn that around, where we've got good, competent leadership and ethical leadership, Jeremy. Thank you.
Advocate Motibi, let me ask you a quick follow-up question. After the revelations of the past couple of years emanating from the Zondo Commission. Are you seeing the needle move in any way towards individuals and organizations thinking more about ethical leadership and how they can change their way of behavior and the way in which they operate?
Right. Thanks for that question, Jeremy. I think even during the times of the hearings of the Zondo Commission, because it really started showing then that there has really been this wave of unethical leadership that has produced, the evidence that we have seen at Zondo Commission pointing to corruption and a whole lot of other irregularities. Now, as we executed during the time of the hearing, what was clear, we were told as law enforcement agencies that we don't need to wait for the outcome of the Zondo Commission to act on the evidence that was produced, and that is why there was that situation where the regulations of the Zondo Commission were amended so that they could hand over the evidence to the law enforcement agencies, in particular to the investigative directorate. From where I sit, even since the release of the first report, and again, when the first report was released, we were reminded that we don't have to wait for the third and the last report as law enforcement agencies so that we can. Now, my observation is that, since we have really started improving in terms of making an inclusive process on the fight against corruption, where we've included civil society, business, and just taking account of all the other organizations. I gave a presentation in December last year to the organization called Defend Our Democracy, but it was during the International Day of Anti-Corruption. So you can see that there is a renewed rigor across the society, civil organizations like Corruption Watch. Just this week, we had an anti-corruption forum, which is focusing on local government. Business Unity South Africa participated. Corruption Watch also is a member of that forum. So I'm saying all of this to say, with all this renewed rigor in the fight against corruption, we are seeing those that are geared up to commit the acts of corruption, albeit on a small scale at the moment, because we still have to lift up on the consequence management and prosecution and all of that. But we are seeing really a tide turning. And in fact, after the release of our PPE report, the SIU PPE investigations report, as it was released, and there was commentary in the public, one executive in one corporate sends me a message and say, the work that we are doing is becoming more difficult for people now to conduct or commit corruption. So I think that really, for me, and I said that to my colleagues internally, I said, you know what, this is an indication that we are turning the tide. So the trick is to make sure that we sustain this fight against corruption, and never to go back, never ever to go back where there has been impunity and people who just have a sense that they can do whatever they like and nothing will happen to them.
Right. Thank you for that. I want to come back to the live panel here. I don't know about you guys, but I take some solace from that. That sounds, if the needle's moving, if there's more engagement and understanding of the whole notion of corruption and becoming more difficult, maybe that's a good thing. Kanisa, you work within the listed company entity. Same question to you. I mean, is there more conversation around ethical leadership post-Zondo now than there was before? Have things changed slightly, do you think? Well, how do you respond to Advocate Mothibe?
So I think in the listed company space, certainly there's always been an expectation. If you think about the listing requirements, there's always been an expectation for sound ethical leadership, appropriate risk management, etc.
Hasn't always been the case, though.
I was about to say, so why are you taking my notes? Because I was about to say, I think ultimately it's about the culture that's driven from the top within the organization, that's well entrenched within the organization, because as you've rightly said, all the frameworks and all the good policies have not necessarily resulted, have not necessarily meant that there are no governance failures. But to come back to your question, I do think that there's a lot more, people are a lot more aware of the need to not only say the right things, but do the right things as well. So what we say in our governance procedures and our policies is actually what we do. And we follow the governance structures and the processes that we've articulated. Of course, time will tell, but I do think that there's a lot more focus on that, especially also if you just look generally around the rising importance of ESG, which also encompasses the whole governance question.
Just for everyone in the room, there is no direct link between Mark Victor leaving the stage and the head of the special investigation. Mark did mention to me that he had an urgent 11:15 that he had to get to, and he asked me to pass on his apologies to you, just in case you're wondering why he left the stage very quickly. Let's talk about another cliche, if we can. Every time in my career I have interviewed someone about an issue, inevitably it comes back to one thing. Do you know what it is?
Economy?
Skills. Okay. Whenever it's the catch-all thing to blame for everything. So risk number 4. Lack of skills to enable economic growth and recovery. Okay, it is a risk. I get it. How do you skin that cat?
How do you skin the cat? Well, unfortunately, that's just one of those risks that are very dependent on other risks. So maybe we're thinking along the same line when you said skills and I was saying economy.
Yeah.
So because they sort of interlink. So again, the pandemic has proven a lot of inefficiencies when it comes to the systems and so forth. And again, I'm not going to refer to them as leadership. I'll say decision makers, because we've since found out that leaders can be everywhere. So the people who are entrusted with the resources of the countries, the decision makers, also make it, unfortunately, very difficult to access skills education, because maybe, just maybe, please don't quote me on this as Treasury, quote me as Treasury, just maybe some of them are not skilled enough to drive towards the right direction. And when Qinisa was talking at some point, I was also thinking we have a lot of initiatives in government. So we have NYDA, we have CIFA, small entities, government entities that are there to assist people innovate themselves, to give skill to people, but it seems they are redundant. And again, when decision makers are put in the forefront to make decisions on how to improve the skills, on how to improve the economy, the decisions are not the most efficient ones. Instead of uplifting these existing institutions to do what they're supposed to do, then we decide that maybe let's give them R1,000 grant just to get by instead of upskilling them. And instead of, I hear there is also a good side to every bad thing. I read somewhere that there is a plan to make Wi-Fi available to everyone in the country. It was not clear if it was all the poor people or just everyone in general. So maybe that's a step towards skilling. So we are making strides, but as I said, we really need to look at what strategies we have, what needs to be done, and do it urgently.
Folks, I am hugely cognizant of time. We are running against the clock today, so I am going to end this conversation knowing that we're never going to give solutions to everything. Ma'am, I'm going to come to you now. I'm going to take one question, and please a question, not a keynote, okay? Then I'm going to ask all four of our panel members to answer the question that our keynote speaker gave or raised in his speech earlier about doing something different and going beyond the orthodoxy and finding the courage to do it. I'm going to put that question to all of you about what next, and then I'm going to ask Pat Semenya, the Chief Executive, to close proceedings for us. Ma'am, you had a question. We wait with bated breath.
Thank you, Jeremy.
There is no pressure.
It's not a question, actually. It was going to answer, how do we skin the cat on skills? And so for me, it's we need a quality education. Right now, it doesn't prepare anyone for any skills that we have. So it starts with the education system, and it starts with the way we have our education system. Right now, it's set to go academic into university. There's a part that's missing, that it teaches us how to use our hands from an artisan perspective. Where is that happening? In the past, we've had it many years ago. I feel that countries that are successful, if you look at their education system, it caters for the route you want to go if you're going academic versus the skills that you can use your hands and use whichever other skills to fix things. Right now, we need to fix things. And how do we do it? We've been taught. And so you keep getting consultants in just to fix basic things, maintenance, etc. Thank you.
And we could raise the issue of consultants as well, but we won't go there. Folks, so did you have one? Did you need to, again, very, very quickly, and then I am going to close it. Val, if we could just get the mic to the gentleman here. No, over here, sir. Thank you.
Hi, Advocate Mchibi. We used to work together.
Yes, Kevin.
Yes. Yes, I'm currently in the process of trying to train some students on your value system. But I just seem to get that you keep on running into a brick wall. You're finding things, you are getting all the wonderful reports. But my question is, how do they then be actualized and implemented and prosecuted? What do you think is the challenge there? Because your work has been fantastic, and not only yours, but all the other law enforcement, previously maybe the public protector, etc. And of course you've got Zondo Commission, etc. But we don't seem to see implementation, and for me that's a risk factor. So
You're being very polite. What you're really asking the advocate is, when are we going to see some action?
Yes. So and I know that's not, you've done your part, and I think I want to congratulate Advocate team, SIU. They're doing a fantastic job. But for me, then what then is next? Because I think that's the challenge, that even when I was in that space, we always had that headache.
Good point. Advocate, very quickly, if you don't mind.
Yes. Look, my colleague, Advocate Kevin Malunga there, we worked very well together, and we all wanted results. So, Kevin, I think of importance, as I was saying, seeing the tide turning really just means that we have to make sure that this system of consequence management, whether it's civil, criminal, or disciplinary conduct, or even regulatory, where data to come and hold those to account, has to work. And I'm so glad that you might have heard, even at the SONA, when it was debated, the minister in the presidency, Minister Gungubeli, indicated that the presidency is going to be creating a structure, and that structure is predominantly meant to monitor the outcomes of the SIU recommendations, but it also going to monitor the outcomes of the Zondo Commission. And the president indicated that he'll be presenting a plan, implementation plan to Parliament in June, he mentioned. But now that the Commission has asked for some extension, the timeline may probably move. I'm not certain. But all I'm saying, Evan, is that you've spotted it very well, but we are all now really committed. And from the top to us making it happen, so we must all just drive towards making sure that the implementation happens. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andy. Kevin, if you're looking for a job, I think you've just made a connection. Folks, some closing remarks very quickly still from you, again, to all of you. And very, very quickly, going beyond the orthodoxy. Such an important phrase. It landed with me today. We need to change our thinking. What do we need to do? Go.
So I think one of the key things, and I've highlighted it in my presentation, is fix the people and bring 46 million people into the economy. And it sounds very airy-fairy. But if I just take a tangible thing, like how do I write a job spec for which I now require somebody to be employed? In our own industry, for instance, we now look for online gaming skills to harvest in a forestry company. It's a different mindset. It's no longer somebody building a chainsaw. So you have a tiny girl driving a big machine in the same way that youth currently sit and play games online. So I think there are skills in the economy that we're not harvesting because our way of recruitment and of defining the jobs that we need is old-fashioned and orthodox. So the more you can bring those people in, get away from the rules, get into the values, and use what's on the ground, I think we'll make a shift on all 9 of those risks.
So, in other words, more PlayStation is really what you're saying. Okay.
Correct.
All right. So, Tiago, from your side?
So I'm going to pick it back from a line that mentioned when he was doing the keynote address. He said he had asked he had asked a few advocates, if I remember correctly, what is wrong with the Constitution. So I'm going to say, I believe when there was a structure, we need politics, we need a structure of government, we need the structure of companies, etc. There was a need for it, and it worked. So, and we're quite comfortable with the policies, know the guide, this and that. But I think now we need to, things have changed, ways of doing things have changed. We need to disassemble that structure. We need to think of what will work effectively. We need to think whether we need so many political representatives, or do we need just a few number of intellects that will drive us to the right direction. So that would be my taking going forward.
Advocate Motibe?
No, Jeremy, from my side, I did say we had a local government anti-corruption forum this week. It was so disheartening and painful to hear that there's a municipality in the Eastern Cape that couldn't pay salaries. It couldn't pay salaries. It has actually been arranged for employees to go and get groceries from Pick and Pay on a, to be paid in monthly or whatever. So I'm making this example that this is a scenario that's prevalent across our service delivery channel. So, and that again points back to the leadership, the skills issue. We really need to beef up that, and the way that managers in the municipalities, in fact across government, are being appointed now has to be really welcomed, where it's really competency based, but of importance to really do things differently, go beyond the orthodox, I think on our side now, again, I keep going back to the fight against corruption. We have to make sure that on the prevention side, we lift up the bar, detection mechanisms, so that we are able to even foresee. We would like to, we are that forward quite hard, so that we implement the modeling mechanisms where data analytics informs us of the probability of corruption being committed. So those indicators, we have to really be smart and ensure that we implement that. And that is, of course, going to have a positive effect on the reactive side of the fight. But until that reactive side also is demonstrated, prosecution, recoveries, and all that. So the prevention side, I think, is really going to be an area where we go beyond the orthodox, Jeremy. Thanks.
Advocate Andy Matibi, thank you.
So thank you. I think 3 things from me. The first, not being mine originally, but it's something that came out from some of the SMEs that we interviewed. And I think it's quite important. It talks to the fact that, yes, you've got this ever expanding social grants bill because of the unemployment rate. And the SME suggested that, in fact, people do want to feel that they are contributing something. So yes, they don't have a job at the moment, but they want to wake up. It gives dignity. So why not look at actually paying a grant on the basis of someone actually doing something? And there's always something that someone can do, right? And then they feel like that they've earned it. It gives them a sense of dignity. So I'm saying that, and I'm really echoing what someone else really said here. There's an opportunity for us to explore that further. And who knows, as they engage in those activities, they're actually then harnessing skills that will make them employable. Because as things are right now, they're just taking. And not really getting the skill. So that's one. And then I'm sitting here picturing a highly professionalized local government partnered with some companies in the private sector where accountants lend services to the municipality to help with the billing problems. Imagine that. Imagine technicians, going into the municipalities and helping fix issues from a critical infrastructure perspective. Because one of the reports that I actually read, I think it was the Dalla Omar Institute, was looking into the skills mismatch at local government. One of the things they found is that, in fact, there is such a high turnover rate in the what's the right name? This profession, this I'm using the word now, but in the professions, within the local government sector. So if you think about your engineers, if you think about your accountants, etc. So now picture a situation where corporates say, we've got the skills, and we've got these, municipalities in our area where we work, we're going to lend these skills, whatever form that will take. I'm picturing companies adopting, or companies or groups of companies adopting schools that are under-resourced in their areas and saying, we're going to copy a model from a private sector school that's been working, and we're going to adopt it in this particular in this particular school, and change the fortunes of the kids that actually come to the school. So those are the things that I think need to change. And this is that all hands on deck sort of approach, where we're not waiting for government to do things, but where we as corporates see the role that we can play, and even for government to change that.
Folks, in this conversation today, a nice blend of practicality and idealism, which I think is important. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Discussions like this always just scratch the surface. Can't walk away from here. We haven't solved all the problems. What I just really hope is that, having looked at the risk report and also taking on board some of the thoughts from our panel members and from Sizwe and from others, that it changes your way of thinking. And I come back to that whole notion of It's up to all of us to challenge the orthodoxy, which I think is important. So folks, thank you very much indeed. That report is in your in-tray. And at this point, please join me in welcoming the Chief Executive Officer of IRMSA, Pat Semenya.
You know, standing up here, you just feel obligated to say good morning again. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to come join us on our very prestigious launch of the Risk Report 2021, our 8th edition for that matter. And we've had insightful conversations this morning, and I wouldn't want to undo the great job that Jeremy has done, but I was listening to everybody talk, thought there's some takeaway that I think just need to stamp upon, so that when we leave today, we know actually care for. Obviously, one cannot ignore the facts that were raised by Dr. Mpofu, and he said the risk of failing, or falling victim to orthodox beliefs. You know, it's all well and good to challenge, but I think what he emphasized, and that stayed with me, and I hope it stays with us today when we leave, is that we must always remember that challenging is a double-edged sword. It is all good to challenge, but be aware and do it responsibly and be willing to take the consequences that comes with it. He also mentioned that the process of challenging is also a very intellectual process. It's not just about, you know, who can speak the loudest or who's got a PhD. It is about making sure that it involves scenario planning with what is. I knew you were going to enjoy that PhD thing as an example. Mr. Lenyaba, our president, and the board members that are here today, thank you so much for always supporting IRMSA's mission. Utmost and heartfelt gratitude goes to the REC committee that is led by Mrs. Christelle Maria. We are here because of you today. The work that you see having been discussed for the last 4 hours, if it wasn't for the RIC committee, we would not have a risk report to share with the world. And I will say that again. IRMSA will not have a risk report to share if I did not have the experts that are come together, spend their time fruitlessly, every day, tirelessly, and give what they give, and to produce such a document year in, year in. And every year we can see that the level of the report is actually rising, meaning that you can see that we are actually getting involved in the fiber of our economies as we wish. Thank you. To our webinar main sponsor, thank you so much, Kira. We really do appreciate that you really believe in our cause. And to our ebook sponsors, AIG. Our main web sponsor is AIG, and Kira is our ebook sponsors. Thank you so much for believing in our mission. Also, our report sponsors, please, all this, the fees that we'll get from that will actually make sure that we progress the risk fraternity. My IRMSA family, thank you for your tireless dedication. You give me very strong shoulders to stand on, and I appreciate that. So, well, the IRMSA risk report is not the only headliner that we will be celebrating today. Over the past 4 years, the IRMSA team have set ambitious goals. This meant that we needed to have themes to serve as a compass so that we don't lose direction of where we're going, and also to serve as an anchor in case we get tired. And this year's theme is level up.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Level up, 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 level up.
I actually got excited later into the conversation today when the conversation in terms of skills development veered towards gamification, if you like, because in fact, we decided for the context of this year to look at the meaning of level up in the context of gaming, where it's about achieving different levels. And what does that mean for us? I mean, we looked at different synonyms for it: advancement, evolve, sour, grow, and build, and basically advancing the risk management as a specialization of choice, across all sectors and levels in an organization. Ultimately, we aspire for a scenario where risk management is embedded in the strategy of all organizations, both in the public and the private sector, in a structured and coherent approach. How do we hope to level up? Some of the things that we think we're going to be doing, in fact, we've planned to do this year, is to firstly keep it simple. We tend to get so busy wanting to deliver and please our community from all that is lost in our business. We also have to make sure that all our deliverables are pegged to a tangible goal that we will be communicating with our community. One of the big goals for IRMSA in the next 2-3 years is that we're looking at expanding our market reach. We plan to do that through diversifying our market target. We're also looking at developing our products because right now, as you know, we've got the CRM Prof and the CRM Prac and our training programs. So part of the bigger, wider strategy in the next 3 years is to look, how do we diversify to make sure that we are able to enter different markets? Fourthly, is investing in our people in terms of development. And this is just to make sure that we are strong enough and we're resilient as an organization and try to build a strong pipeline of talent within so that we're always future ready. So ladies and gentlemen, get used to that theme. It will come across in most of our comms and engagement. And with that, I wish you a very good afternoon. Thank you so much.